Hi, everybody. My name is John Mahana. I am a co-founder of Relief Syria, and I welcome you today to our Fireside chat with Mr. Samir Aita. Before we begin, I would like to give a quick overview of Relief Syria. Relief Syria is a grassroots initiative created to share information and spread awareness about the ongoing effects of the sanctions enacted on Syria and its people and the consequences that have developed as a result of a decade of conflict and the subsequent severe economic downturn of Syria. Relief Syria aims to advocate for Syrians' inalienable right to live fulfilled and dignified lives in their homeland, specifically as it relates to economic opportunity. Today, it is my pleasure to have Mr. Samir Aita here on to discuss this very important topic of sanctions. Professor Aita is a president of the French-based Circle of Arab Economists. He is a former editor-in-chief and general manager of Le Monde Diplomatique Editions Arab. He is a lecturer of political economy at the University of Paris Dauphine, the Sorbonne, and St. Joseph University of Beirut. He is a consultant in economy, finance, labor, and urban planning. He was born in Damascus, Syria in 1954, and he is currently a senior consultant with UN agencies and other international organizations, mainly focusing on the Middle East, including Iraq, Syria, and Libya. Professor Aita, welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
Our pleasure. So I wanted to first just start off giving an overview of your thoughts on the Caesar sanctions and possibly sanctions more broadly that have been imposed on Syria.
Okay, hello to you and to your listeners. Look, OFAC says that Syria sanctions program is one of the most comprehensive sanctions programs currently implemented in the world on any other country. So this sanction program developed gradually since the 1970s with a major step during the invasion of Iraq. And the first remark that it does not differentiate between what I call the power system, the regime, the individuals who govern Syria, the state of Syria, the state institutions, and the population. And it does not distinguish between the different group of products, especially what is needed by the people. So the major remark that it hits state institutions like the central bank, and it hits crucial products such as fuel. The second thought on this is that by nature, sanctions produce vicious effects. When you impose so large sanctions on a country, the economy of the country, the behavior of the actors would go informal. And you impose more sanctions, they will go more informal, and then the whole country become informal and illegal. So those who control informal activity, especially the power system, the secret services, the different militia, they take their cost for bringing the products necessary to the population. They will add costs for their for bringing these products, and they will drive the population to poverty. So the effects of the sanctions by itself, by its mechanism, make the power system, the authorities more powerful, stronger than before, and they weaken the population that it intend to support. So in my opinion, these sanctions breach what is internationally admitted principle that if you want to do something to a complex situation, you have to do no harm to the population. So it makes harm to the population. And the last remark is questioning how these sanctions could be lifted. Security Council Resolution 5.4 that everybody calls for in Syria is a negotiated solution between the opposition, whatever is the opposition, and the power system in Syria. So how somebody who is sanctions can negotiate in principle. And the second major question on these sanctions is, in fact, Syria is now divided in three areas of control. The US controlling one of the areas in the northeast. So the question is how these sanctions can help reunifying Syria, or are they really designed to split the country off? This is a question that I have in mind.
Right. And what would you say would be some of the, I know we touched upon some of these impacts more on a superficial level, but what would you say are some of the greatest impacts that sanctions have had on Syria and on the average Syrian?
The great impact is, if someone wants to simplify the things, is on three issues. One is the lack of fuel. Fuel is needed to pump water, to irrigate, to make agricultural crops. Fuel is needed for mobility. Fuel is needed to bring drinking water to many areas. So blocking oil and fuel on Syria makes first Syria completely dependent officially on Iran and Russia to have some fuel, and informally depending on Lebanon, Iraq, and the cross lines with the northeast to bring some fuel. So this increased the dependency on, let's say, the foes of the US for this. In addition, the lack of fuel makes that the Syrian economy collapse, both industrial production, agricultural production, trade, whatever. So the first big impact is fuel. The second big impact is that all the sanctions, especially on the central bank, makes that with the collapse of the economy, that any possibility of exports is difficult. So the only possible foreign currency revenues of the country are now expatriate remittances, which are not very high. The exchange rate collapsed, there is high inflation, and there is also financially a dependency on Lebanon. When Lebanon had been struck by its financial crisis, most of the Syrians had lost their money in the banks. My estimation is $20-30 billion, not for the state, not for the crony guys, but for the normal guys who used to hide their money in Lebanon. So Syria became very dependent, and the Syrian pound on Lebanon, and also on Turkey, now who continues to trade with Syria. And the third major effect is that with all the going into informality, state revenues has collapsed. And when you say state revenues, means the state cannot anymore ensure normal activities, basic services, from health to education to drinking water to electricity, etc. So this leads to chaos. So what is after chaos? So really, the three major effects are fuel, foreign currency financials, and state revenue.
Right. And you know, the fuel question seems to be a very important one because it impacts so many industries, impacting food, electricity. You know, you touched on the fact on how sanctions will be lifted. What are the conditions that would allow sanctions to be lifted? So the stated goals of the Caesar Act in general is to create accountability for crimes by the Syrian government and its allies, Russia and Iran, Sanctions are also to discourage foreign investors from doing business with the Syrian government in an effort not to reward war crimes. These are the stated goals. We do know that sanctions has been discouraging foreign investment in Syria, and so that aim seems to be working. However, are we seeing greater accountability towards the Syrian government and its allies because of the Caesar Act sanctions? Do you think that that is occurring?
I think this whole mixture between the question of accountability and sanctions is somehow vicious. Somebody is war criminal. He is an individual, and you have to prosecute him with evidence and etc. And you have a lot of cases in Europe, for example, when there were prosecution and condemnation of war criminals and etc. with people coming and testifying what happened to them and etc. This is the process to hit on war criminals. You can sanction the individuals, forbid them from traveling, forbid them from having accounts in banks and whatever. But sanctioning a country, sanctioning a state, sanctioning the foreign trade will hit the people. It means the case of Iraq, we can discuss about this, shows that even that there were different sanctions because there were UN Security Council sanctions and not unilateral measures by the US in Europe, they hit the population. Even that Iraq was a rich country, even oil-rich country, and not Syria. I can quote to you, I have with me a quote from Madeleine Albright in the Times saying that the sanctions on Iraq at this time did not produce their effects on Iraq, and we have to think on something else. Even the UN abandoned comprehensive sanctions. Madeleine Albright said, we learned in many ways that comprehensive sanctions often hurt the people of the country and don't really accomplish what is wanted in order to change the behavior of the country being sanctioned. So we began to look at something called smart sanctions and targeted sanctions. Smart sanctions mean the individuals, not the central bank and not the foreign trade in general.
Okay.
I told you from the beginning, the sanctions, when they are general on the state, on the country, they make the regime, they make the crony guys stronger than before. Bashar al-Assad is in castle and everybody is pulled around, so no hope for change.
Yeah. So I guess to get your opinion on this, given that you just quoted Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State under Clinton, very well-respected diplomat of the United States, in the United States, her having that knowledge, her explicitly saying it, and given that the U.S. is trying to bring accountability to Syrian government and its allies, why do you think the United States would impose such sanctions on Syria, given that they most likely know that accountability would not occur?
This is an interesting question. There were, let's say, differences of orientation between Syria, I'm talking geopolitics here and politics in general, between the US and Syria. The major crisis came in 2003 because the Syrian authorities, but also the Saudi authorities, had the people fighting against the US invasion in Iraq to be financed, to have weapons, and etc. So the first sanctions, especially in the year 2003 were intended to this point. So a conflict, political conflict with the Syrian authorities. Now the US withdrew from Iraq and etc. And not completely. And they lived what happened in the Arab countries with the Arab Spring, and a new era is coming. I can see it through what is happening in Gaza today. What does the US want? I'm not really optimistic. The logic of politics somehow follows some crazy schemes, especially in now a world which is multipolar, where the US want to have influence on China and Russia and etc. Sanctions is an easy way to do things.
And so what it sounds like to me is that as opposed to creating accountability, Caesar Act is really being used as some form of leverage.
It's a political leverage. Look at the Caesar Act. The text says that the president of the US can stop the sanctions at any time because of 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., whatever the reason. So it became a tool of negotiation with a mandate from the Congress and the Senate. While most of the sanctions of 2003 were by executive orders. So it's a tool of political negotiation with the regime. I don't know what they want to do with that. Yeah. But if you talk about accountability, now the UN and many countries, including Norway, talk about war crimes made by Netanyahu and the Israeli government. Will the US support accountability of the Israeli government and Mr. Netanyahu for war crimes? This is a major question. While the US refused to be to acknowledge the international tribunal, the ICC.
Right. So in a way, right now we're seeing a little bit of double standards. Yeah. With the US's approach. And since we quickly touched on geopolitics, I did want to get your idea and your thoughts on the process of normalization that was happening over the summer, or so-called normalization with the Syrian government, with other countries in the region, most notably Saudi Arabia, UAE, and others. Where do you see that normalization process going, and do you think that will lead to these countries overlooking the Caesar Act and taking a unilateral stance and trying to invest in Syria themselves? Do you see that?
I don't think that this normalization has any economic perspective on at least at the medium run, or even a political impact, strong political impact. Look, the Gulf countries who control the League of Arab States, especially Saudi Arabia now, in 2011 it was Qatar, are normalizing this. For the Arab public opinion, they want to cover that. So one of the ways to cover is to say, okay, we cannot kick out a founding member of the League of our state, which is Syria, whatever happened, and normalize with Israel. So this was a way to get out of this for, let's say, the Arab public opinion, and continue with the normalization with Israel. If you look at the details, nothing happened. Means okay, and then the funny thing is, on the sanctions by itself, is that Syria is sanctions, Bashar al-Assad is sanctions, but Bashar al-Assad can travel, can go to the Saudi Arabia, can go to different places, and etc. While the normal Syrian citizen is starving, is having difficulties to have a bank account, to have different things, and etc., including traveling. So all this turn even the subject of sanction in somehow in a ridiculous way.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. I do want to take a step back, and I know that we actually discussed a little bit about Captagon, and I wanted to just allow you to speak a little bit on Captagon, maybe talk about what it is. Talk about you mentioned before our meeting that that you actually warned about its rise in Syria, the rise in production and distribution globally. Just thought I wanted to give you some time to discuss that with us.
And first, there are drugs in the area. Two major producers of drugs, hard drugs, are Afghanistan and Morocco. Nobody speaks about Morocco. People like to talk about, and somehow Lebanon. So there are routes for these drugs, including the routes that goes from Afghanistan to Iran, to Turkey, to Bulgaria, and to Europe. And the other way from Morocco, not directly to Spain, but through the Sahara, etc., and then Libya, and then Egypt, and continues to Europe. These are major trade routes for drugs, documented, by the way, by the United Nations agencies. In Syria, there was not a lot of drugs historically. But there was a pharmaceutical industry which used to provide for 80% of the medicaments in the country. So very much developed. The economy of this industry, and this is what I presented in an IMF World Bank meeting in DC in 2017, that the economy of this pharmaceutical industry was made on the basis that this industry has to sell at low prices inside Syria, because the purchase power was not high, while it should export to other countries, mostly generics, like India, like Pakistan, like whatever. And the economy is made with the money, or the foreign currency is made from exports. With the sanctions, these industries were not able anymore to export. The whole international transactions were blocked, especially with the sanctions on the central bank. So what do these industries want to do? These were big investments at some point. So gradually, these factories transformed to Captagon. Captagon is a kind of, not exactly a drug, it's a stimulant, which is consumed mostly in the Gulf countries and was consumed by the combatants during the fierce periods of the fighting inside Syria. Originally, the idea came, this is very well documented, from Bulgaria, who used to produce this. Anyhow, so factories which were in urban areas owned by guys who were in government areas were functioning to produce Captagon with chemicals coming through Lebanon and etc. A very stupid scheme. And the consumers of these products are mostly the Saudi guys and the Emirati guys and etc. So I was warning, and with the transformation of the Syrian economy, as I said earlier, to informality, of course, this had been increasing largely. Suddenly, the US and some of the think tanks and lobbies and etc. woke up with the question of Captagon, of course, to get them to export. You cannot export directly from Syria. They go through Lebanon and maybe the Hezbollah, but I think everyone is involved in that, like in the arm deals and etc. And they export this through different means to the Gulf countries. And then you have funny things, and of course, people lobbies in the US in DC wanting to extend and make new laws, like the Caesar Act, Captagon Act, or whatever.
Yeah.
But then you have official expeditions from Lebanon to Saudi Arabia. They find in this expedition at the ports of Saudi Arabia some Captagon hidden in the products. They hit Lebanon and block any export from Lebanon to Saudi Arabia, while no one asked to whom was sent the products in Saudi Arabia. No names. This was not like in what happens in Jordan, that sometimes they find in the desert some camels and transporting stuff or whatever.
Right.
It was an official expedition. To whom it was sent, while nobody talks about the companies who are importing products, knowing that the Captain is hidden inside. So it's also here double standards and etc. But the main cause is when you leave a country in chaos and in informality. Of course, this will develop.
Right, and I know that there was I saw a BBC documentary about the Captagon trade and the amount of money that a Syrian can make smuggling Captagon over the border to Jordan, as opposed to its standard salary of maybe $30 a month, is astronomically different. And so there's obviously the financial incentive for this to proliferate, especially with sanctions imposed.
Captagon is a very easy, cheap product to produce with a very high price. So the premium on it, the benefits are enormous.
Right, and I think, and I've spoken about this with members of Relief Syria. It's interesting to hear a lot of the discussions in the U.S. about Captagon and how to curb it. It almost rings the same language as the war on drugs back in the 70s and 80s, where the U.S. Working with various governments in Latin America were trying to curb drug trade, but every time they would, let's say, cut off the head of one snake, two more would grow back. And we touched on the amount of money that can be made from these drugs, the capital benefits, because they're so astronomical. In a way, a beast has been made that will be very hard to put down. How do you stop something like this? Unless how do you stop something like this when there's already the infrastructure in place to make the drugs, and and salaries are so low that people are willing to sacrifice to sell it, you know?
Of course, look at the initial crisis of drugs between Latin America and the US. How this has reduced somehow, only by Bolivia and other areas helping the state control to develop, taking rid of all the drug big guys,
Like the kingpins, yeah.
but and their control of large areas. If chaos is in some country and nobody can control, all the discussions in the US has no meaning, because if you cannot make the rule of law in one country, whoever is making the rule of law, as you said, everyone will take the opportunity to make some revenues because there is no other mean of revenue. So it was by helping Latin American countries to extend their rule of law and the control of the state that things reduced somehow. And there is no way beside helping the Syrian state to be, whoever is governing it, to be strong, again, to control it. You cannot take, I'm not defending Bashar Assad, I never liked him, he's a criminal. But from rationality, you cannot make Bashar Assad accountable on Captagon while you push the country to be in informality and chaos. This doesn't make sense. He doesn't control himself the things. So because the state institutions, the salaries of the people in the public services, the salaries of the guys in the army are so reduced that they cannot do anything. Forget about Syria. Look at Lebanon now with the collapse of the money. The salary of the military, the security forces, and etc. are ridiculous. So, and people talk about smuggling, etc. Of course, they will make smuggling. They will encourage smuggling because they will make revenue. All the security services and the army in Lebanon is making smuggling to get someone. But in my opinion, the way the woke up so late on the Captagon issue, while there was a lot of warning, and not only from me, from the UN, is strange. This means that it is used for political reasons by some lobbies, their backers, and etc., to make another case. And the question is, where do you want to go at the end? Okay, you block the country completely, and the people are starving. 90% of the population are below poverty line. And then what? Will that reduce the power of Bashar al-Assad? Will that bring democracy? If there is no state, there will be no democracy. State institutions.
Right. Right. That's very important to that people know that. I did want to touch on a little bit about, I think I wanted to talk to you about reconstruction. I read an interview that you conducted in 2016 about incorporating Syrian refugees that were residing in Lebanon and Jordan into the reconstruction of Syria. And I really just wanted to get your idea of reconstruction in general, more specifically, I guess the question is, should there be conditions put on the start date of reconstruction, and who can participate? Are those fair things to impose, or do you think reconstruction should just occur regardless, even if the bad guys, so to speak, benefit?
Let me explain why I wrote what I wrote at this moment. It's because of the brain drain. Most of the people who flew out of Syria were well educated. There was a study in Germany that the average education of the Syrian refugees was higher than the average education of the German. So, of course, the educated people are fleeing abroad and etc. And my expectation is that those who flew to Europe will not come back. Those who flew to the US, whatever is the mean to arrive to the US, will not come back. They will make noise in the US, but that's it. On the contrary, those who are in Lebanon are very nearby. They still go. Some Lebanese complain that they go in illegally to Syria and come back to Lebanon. Of course, they don't want to make the military service. So those who are in Lebanon and those who are in Jordan, especially those who have education and are with what remains, the only human resources who are capable of doing the reconstruction as a goal. Then the question of reconstruction merit take several remarks. One is, if you take housing into account, and knowing that during the civil war, there was in Syria, there was a lot of housing destroyed. There was more housing built during the war than destroyed. People moved from one place to another, build things. Take Homs. Homs, the center of Homs was destroyed, but many of the people of Homs went to the countryside, to other areas, and built their new homes. The population is still growing. The main places where you have informal shelters and tents are in the northwest and in the northeast. But in the other areas where there is the majority of the population, very few are in tents. So there is construction. So it's not about housing, it's about first the economy. Reconstruction is a recovery of the economy. So rebuilding the infrastructure, having fuel, having electricity, and making that people can have jobs and revenues, because it's the people who rebuild everything with their revenues. If you there is an image in Syria that before the 2011 uprising, everything was built by the state. No, the state didn't build 15% of the housing. Everything was built by the people, by their own, because they needed homes and etc. So it will continue like this forever. So, but you cannot build if you don't have revenues. So it's reactivation of the economy. There is a lot of literature in the UN on this, that the important in reconstruction. Then you have specific problems. One of the problems is the destroyed areas and how to deal with this. This is a subject called HLP, house land property. Okay, you have a building, you have 10 families in this building. Some went to Europe or the US, don't want to come back, they don't care. One want to rebuild, he's still in Syria. One is displaced, he want to. How to deal with the property rights of these things for what is to be rebuilt, how to deal. You have solutions like in Beirut, what Rafiq Hariri has made and transformed everything to a private company and etc. So some of the crony guys around Bashar Assad dream about doing that, but also some of the people saying, okay, I was here, I want my property rights. It's difficult also to make. So there is some logic, but it needs peace, and it needs a peace environment to deal with these difficult issues. Why you return the property of a guy who owns an apartment, and you give no right to the guy who was in for 30 years renting the apartment, while the law in Syria admit you that if you were renting for something like for a long time, And if the owner want to kick you out, he should pay you 40% of the price of the house. So you have right and this and people used to rent houses. So what do you do with the people who was renting houses? This is one problem. The second problem is that you have large areas around the big cities with the rural urban migration, which was informal, which means there is no documentation of the property right. They built illegally. What is funny is that the state provided them electricity, sewage, drinking water, and etc., but they have no property rights. So this is, for example, Duma in measures. This is Daraya. Many of these areas were, quote, informal. Means with no property rights, and there was a lot of this in Syria. So how you solve this? How you bring the things, and this needs a lot of calm and that the psychological split now between the mentality and government area, the mentality in Northeast and in Northwest to be reduced, that the people, you need some healing of what happened during the Civil War. So, and of course, you need the infrastructure, means water, electricity, and etc., to get everything back. But you have several difficult issues to deal with the country. And last thing, I must insist on this. You need to reunify the country, which means that the different parts of Syria, Northeast, Northwest, and the other areas are complementary. Means there is no tradition in the Northeast of industry, of trade, of the Turks and the Kurdish companies in Turkey control the whole trade of the Northeast. There is no historical tradition of the historical tradition is in Aleppo, in Damascus, in Homs, and etc. So if you keep each of these three blocks separated, you cannot build an economy properly in the country. And last remarks, everybody, some of the people are talking about the need of $300 billion, $400 billion, whatever, to rebuild Syria. No, the needs are much less than that. But because what you need is just what you need to import to Syria to help the things: steel, oil, fuel, and things like this. So this is somehow kind of carrot, maybe, but also it pushed for, let's say, for despair, because nobody has 300 or 400 billion dollars to put on Syria. So, on these things. So the question is today, even in the aid activity, the US and Europe say no reconstruction, nothing should be rebuilt, no recovery, only early recovery. Well, nobody understands the meaning of early recovery. But then when you talk with somebody in the UN, he said, okay, you have a destroyed school. If you rebuild only one floor, it's early recovery. If you make 2 floors, it's recovery. So they forbid to make the second floor. This is stupidity. It means we need schools.
Yeah.
We need health services.
And sorry to cut you off. If you could, for our viewers, give a definition to early recovery, could you give a definition to it?
And there are definitions in the UN. I don't have in mind, but means early recovery. Aid is giving people which has no revenues directly the revenues. Early recovery is permitting them the activities that allow them to start to gain some revenues. This
Okay.
is the basic definition. So they will not depend on aid.
Okay.
But all this and complete recovery is that again they have their own revenues. They don't need any aid anymore.
Right.
So to put it simple, this way.
Right.
So early recovery is beginning, but this is stupid. Look at what's happening in the north, east, and west. They are still distributing aid 12 years after the event in nature, which means product, including agricultural products that are produced in Syria. They don't give them money because they fear that if they give them the money directly, well, what makes sense because they will spend the money as they want, especially that the Northeast and the Northwest are not under sanctions and everything is available. Here they give them lentils, huge quantities distributed, coming from Turkey, bought from Turkey, produced in Turkey, bought from Turkey. So the price of lentils in the Northwest and etc. is very low. So no one want to crop for lentils, and while Syria and especially the Northwest was major producer of lentils. So they continue with this. This is an intricate scheme which is completely stupid. In-kind aid could be done the first year, 2 years after an earthquake, because people are not able to, the circuits of the trade are not organized, but cannot continue for 12 years. You have to make the people working on it. You can help them in an early recovery with some money and say, okay, it's not enough for you to live, but you can, I will help you to build your own business, your own small activity, and train you for that and educate you on how you create business. This is early recovery, but not continue on sending them food, base food products, and etc. Especially that most of these take the Northwest and Northeast. The products are sent there. They are distributed by NGOs, quote, who are from the residents of these areas, who take their share. They are paid $5,000 per month, the guy, to go and distribute in the camps. So this makes a social split between the residents of these areas and the displaced. The Northwest, half of the population is originally from there, and half is displaced from somewhere else. And there is, through the aid, an exploitation of these guys, of the displaced, by the residents. The same in the Northeast and the same in the government areas.
Yeah.
So this is a stupid mechanism.
Interesting. You actually also touched on, I think I heard you say that the Caesar Act doesn't impact, or sanctions don't impact the Northeast or Northwest. Did I hear you correctly? Are you, from your own research, are you seeing economic development in those areas that is being helped from outside, or are those areas also stagnant, much like government areas?
In the Northwest, there is some development of economic activities, but with a lot of difficulties because of the situation of Afrin, of ousting the Kurdish population there, of the chaos and the Azaz, Mare, and etc., North Aleppo, called Northern Aleppo area. The activity is more organized where al-Nusra, Fatah al-Sham, etc. Even if this is declared even by the UN as terrorist organization. And there is a lot of activities made by the US, France, Germany, and etc. to train people how to create business. There is some business, but assume that you have great business. If you don't have the big consumers, which are in Aleppo or in Damascus, who cares?
Right.
And the Turks will not allow you to come with your products to their things because you will hit their economy.
Right.
So, okay, so there are some small activities developing there because they were around some cities and with some activities. Northeast is different. Northeast activities were mainly agricultural, with no big industrial thing. It was one or two factories. The first oil factories collapsed after 2 years of the thing. The problem is culture. But again, the important agricultural activities in the Northeast had completely collapsed because there are many reasons, but there is a funny one. Is that the self-administration of the Northeast, which is a Marxist-Leninist party allied with the US, funny alliance, is reproducing the scheme in Iraq and even in Kurdistan, Iraq. Means half of the people who are employed of the authorities, means in the public sector. And this does not encourage anyone to create business. Okay, this is the case of Iraq, and this is why Iraq has not a lot of local production, because the development since 2003 didn't force the people to work. Everybody is on public revenue. So they put a lot of people on public revenue for different reasons. So this also does not encourage that a lot of businesses develop in the Northeast.
From a personal perspective, you are based in France. Have these sanctions in general affected your life personally? Any family members, people that you know living in Syria or outside of Syria? Just wanted to get some personal anecdotes.
Yeah, no, myself, I'm not hit. I'm in France since 1972. This makes me a little bit old. And I have French passport since 1985. So
no impact on you.
I don't have any problem myself. But all the family living in Syria. No, I lost my parents a long time ago. But I still have cousins and etc. Being in Syria, they are all having a hard time with sanctions and etc. One clear example, just to tell you, is with some other professors, people in the universities in France. We tried to help the Syrians in our way, creating an NGO which with the universities make a selection of every year 20, 40, depending on the finances we can get and the number of universities we can get with us, to bring some young students, very early age, to study French and go to universities. The major problem was to open an account because of the ceasefire and the sanctions. No bank which has any activity or subsidiary in the US wanted to open a bank account for the Syrians, while these Syrians came with the official passport, official visa from the French government, are registered officially in the university and are officially resident. No way to, it was extremely difficult, and you have to go to special type of banks who had no activity outside France to be able to open accounts for them, and this was catastrophic because in a country like France, and imagine in the United States, if you don't have a bank account, everything is blocked. Example, but the examples inside Syria are much worse. Much worse. The people, especially after the initial sanctions, putting their money in the Lebanese banks, and now all what they saved their whole life disappeared in the Lebanese bank.
Yeah,
you cannot imagine. I don't belong to low class society. I'm middle class, but in my family. But these people, doctors who are famous, who spend their lives saving other lives and etc., and have some saving and etc. Everything disappeared, and at 70, 75, they are forced to work 15 hours per day just to make living.
I don't think a family that isn't impacted, especially with family in Syria, impacted by these sanctions severely. And so with that, if you had the ear of the President of the United States, or you could speak to all the American people, European leaders and the people of Europe, if you wanted them to know one or two things about the impact of their sanctions on Syria, what would that be?
First, I come almost every year to the US, and I speak to the administration, including, I don't know if they hear. I speak, but, and I do my duty. And, first, what can somebody say? That the sanctions, as they are made, they make that Syrian people has no electricity, no medicines, hyperinflation, poverty. They are in poverty. They lack means of decent living, and we have an enormous flee of human resources, which make any opportunity for good things happening soon impossible. The economy is destroyed, the society is deeply divided, and the state institutions are collapsing for chaos. So how can this bring any peace, any recovery? This is what the message. I'm pessimistic because I don't see the rationality getting out anytime soon, especially that, as I see, like many Arabs, that nothing in the US is supporting freedom and dignity for the Palestinians, while the right of the Palestinians is very clear. They are under colonial rule, and they want just to have rights, both two states or one state, whatever. So even in this clear situation, rationality and human rights cannot come. How about Syria, which is a more complex case? Of course, the authorities or the guys on the power system are criminals, but everybody has been playing as criminals. And on the other side, they were their backers. So how you can have a rationality which supports freedom and dignity in Syria in a complex situation where nobody want to acknowledge today that it was also a civil war, not only an uprising against dictatorship. So this rationality, I'm pessimistic about it, but I'm still fighting and saying my word.
Yeah, it's a very sober note, and we will continue working on our end to lobby for these sanctions to be removed. As you clearly stated, there are severe impacts on
Keep
the
the sanctions
population.
on the individuals. Who cares?
Right.
But move them on the state. Move them out on the state institutions, central bank, trade, and etc. This sanctions, as they are today, make the regime stronger.
Thank you, Professor Samir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for watching. Just quickly to close out, to stay connected with Relieve Syria, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just search for our handle at Relieve Syria on Facebook and Twitter. That's one word. Or Relieve Syria. That's also one word on Instagram. Leave us a message. Let us know what your thoughts are. Hope you guys enjoyed this edition of our Fireside Chat, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you, Samir.
Thank you.
Thank you.